Chapter 3, Learning to Fear Like Christians, is our topic for today. By the way, I have forgotten to tell you what the rules are.
We have rules?
We have rules? No, that's probably...
Is this part of our fear like Christians?
Yeah. Here are the rules. The rules are, if you have a question, you better ask it quick. Because my attention span is even shorter than it used to be when you remembered it. Anyway, so... let's move on and start. Instead of popular songs, we'll pick a popular song. Actually, Amazing Grace is probably the most requested hymn in America. It was written by John Newton, who was a slave trader, who literally got religion and became an abolitionist. Now, given the terms of the class, you think that probably the most important part is to look at the second verse, which is, "'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace my fears relieved. How precious did that grace appear the hour I first believed." Okay, and that's going to show up. Trust me on that one. That'll show up. But to begin with, I would like for us to consider the first verse. "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. 'Twas blind, but now I see." And why that's important is there is an importance to confession. I've always heard it said confession is good for the soul, but it's hell on the reputation. It's not just good for the soul, it's absolutely necessary. Because before we can begin to hear the good news as good news, we have to understand that we need to hear it. One of the problems that we have when we show up at church is we come in with an inherent sense of our own righteousness. And we feel so inherently righteous that it's hard for us to hear the word as good news. It's more like it's what was owed to us in the first place. We clear on what I'm saying there? In other words, if I don't really need it, then so what? And it becomes news just like all the other news we hear that can be either accepted or rejected depending on how we feel that particular day. Now, Willimon on page 40. "There can be no healing without honest confrontation and efforts to make restoration of the wounds. No reconciliation to our sameness without honesty about our differences." One of the problems we have in dealing with whoever the other is to us is that we don't want to honestly confront the differences. And we don't want to honestly confront why those differences exist. Okay? 42. "Judgments can be made against evil done by another, but Christians make those judgments with confession of the possibility of our own complicity in the sinful acts that we condemn, with differentiation between the perpetrator as a person that is a dearly beloved child of God, and his or her wrong actions that are offense against God and neighbor." Sometimes we hear people say, "Well, I love the sinner, but I hate the sin." Now, what they really mean is they hate both of them, okay, or ignore both of them, or use the second to ignore the first. However you want to do that. 42. "We are to love, yes, but we are also to desire the truth, particularly about ourselves and the other. We not only dare to tell the truth about the other, but also to hear the truth from another. Above all, we look upon the other's possible wrongdoing with appropriate modesty that shows our determination not to divide the world between us and them when it comes to participation in evil." Again, Paul reminds us all have sinned. In other words, sometimes we need to be with people. We were talking, last time, about how you just have to show up and be present and hear what they have to say. Even if it's uncomfortable for you to hear. We hold ourselves almost blameless most of the time. Okay? And it's hard for us to accept the possibility, we might have just contributed to some of, quote, their problem. Okay. A classic example of how that was handled was the Truth and Reconciliation Commission that happened after the fall of apartheid in South Africa. A commission, this was the act. A commission is a necessary exercise to enable South Africans to come to terms with their past on a morally accepted basis and to advance the cause of reconciliation. In other words, before we can reconcile what? We have to take seriously what has gone before. I would contend, and I'm not a cult of one on this one, I would contend that one of the problems we have with race relations in this country is that we have never taken seriously the history that leads up to it. We are here because of where we've been. Okay, we'll talk more about that before we're through here. This is one of the harder ones. I struggled with this one because, as I said, confession is good for the soul, but it's also hell on the self-image. Now, this is David, I don't know how to pronounce his name, Steindl Rast in Gratefulness, the Heart. To have faith does not primarily mean believing something, but rather believing in someone. Faith is trust. It takes courage to trust. Now hear this. The opposite of faith is not disbelief, but distrust or fear. Fear makes us cling to anything within reach. Fear clings even to beliefs. Faith is the courage to respond gratefully to every given situation out of trust in the giver. When we allow our fear of them, we'll hang on to the fear, and we'll come up with ways to believe that fear is valid, even if that's not right. Or we'll pick some things that are right, just enough to make us feel justified. Okay? I saw a deal one time. They were interviewing a quote, Christian survivalist. Okay. They may not be mutually exclusive terms, but anyway. And he showed them all his food that he had stored away in his bunker. Okay? And on the wall were like 6 AR-15s. And he said, well, what is that? And he said, well, I've got to protect my food when the stuff comes. And the guy said, Christian survivalist. And he said, well, do you think that's what Jesus would do? And the man responded, he would if he had an AR-15. So what happens is, we take the view we have of Jesus, and we unfortunately do not allow the view to shape us. We allow our view to shape our view of Jesus. Well, he would if he had an AR-15. Or he would be against this person like I am. He would hate the same people I hate. He would be afraid of the same people I'm afraid of. How do I know that? Well, because Jesus, on his good days, is just a slightly better version of me. Willimon, 39. Our problem in regard to fear is that we fear the other more than we fear God, who commands love each other. Or we make rationalizations where we amend what God really wants. I know what it says, but trust me, I know what he really wants. Okay. Courage is not the absence of fear, but rather having a reason for doing the right thing in spite of fear. Fearing, revering, and honoring something more than safety. Wrong fear tends to be a function of our imagination more than the reality of our true situation. Fear out of proportion to the threat of the object of our fear. Fear that plays upon our insecurities and builds artificial barriers between us. Fear that cheats us of all that God intends us to be. Why? Because we are created to be in community. There's a very interesting book that you kind of have to plow through. John Crossan and his wife put it together. She is a photographer, and of course he's a theologian. And they began to detect in the artwork that they were seeing in the East, the Middle East and in that area, a difference in the view of the resurrection. The Western church has a very individual view of the resurrection. The Eastern church has a universal view of the resurrection, and it shows up in their art over the years. And what they were trying to ascertain is, when did that division take place? Our focus is, let's all get together, and if I'm real good, then I get to go to heaven. Notice on the emphasis, not we get to go to heaven, I get to go to heaven. And, if you don't make it, well, I'm sorry. Hope you have a better day. Whatever. Okay. The artwork from the East showed not only Jesus being resurrected, but Adam and Eve being resurrected, and the soldiers being resurrected. That somehow we're all in this together. And from its outset, Christianity was a community structure, not an individual structure. And somehow we have backed away from that. Okay? And because that's not who we were created to be, that's where that last line comes in. That fear cheats us of all that God intended us to be. You can see the page numbers on it. At its best, the church teaches us to be afraid of our propensity to fear. Just think about that one for a minute. To not fear the wrong things in the wrong way, and to fear the right things in the right way. Too often we get those confused. Okay?
In other words, you're saying we should, at the best, we should be afraid of rift in the community. We should be afraid of the things.
Well, because of the cost.
Right.
But we're not. We're more afraid of them than we are of tearing the community. And because there may be one or two bad actors, quote unquote, in and amongst them, we can discount all of them for fear that we might be hurt by any of them. And so because of our fear of being hurt by any of them, we ignore all of them, and our sense of community is shattered. Boy, there was a sentence there somewhere. I know that. Yeah, there you go. Go.
The Monday night group of men that get together, one night, I think the major conclusion we came to is anytime we believe that we agree with Jesus more than 80% of the time, we're probably here in wrong places.
Yeah. Well,
I'm sorry,
anytime you hear, if you feel like you're agreeing with Jesus' message greater than 80%, you're probably hearing wrong voices.
Well,
Unpack that.
well, but the thing is,
That our prejudices.
no, but it gets back to that deal. We have not allowed Jesus to shape us. We've shaped Jesus. Okay, look at all the artist pictures of Jesus. This is okay. What color is he? Well, but most of the stuff we see in the West is white.
And tall, for that matter.
Yeah, and good looking, Now, Solomon's Head of Christ affected all of us, because it was on every wall in every Sunday school class in every church in every part of the country. Okay, now, I have to break this to you. Jesus was not white. Second, Jesus was a Jew. That seems to escape us somehow. And it always fascinates me how Christians can be so anti-Semitic at times. Jesus was a Jew. Come on. Let it kind of sink in. Whatever. Okay, now. A question. I wonder how the members of that South Carolina congregation will react the next time a white person walks into the midst of their prayer meeting. You know who I'm talking about. Now, it would be very easy for them to say, "We've seen you guys. And you didn't do us any good at all. So why don't you just stay outside and we'll have our prayer meeting all to ourselves? Because we can trust each other. But you white guys make us nervous." That flips, by the way. I remember one Sunday morning, early service, a gentleman came in off the streets. And it was pretty obvious that all the circuits were not, they just weren't working. And he came in and sat down on the front row. And I'll confess to you, it scared the hell out of me. I didn't know what to do. We went on, but about, third of the way into the service, I noticed, after a hymn, Kurt Shaw, maybe Hensley too, I can't remember who all else it was, just walked up and just sat down with him. And as a way of saying, you're all right, and we're all right, and everybody's okay. But that's what, when something comes in, and I didn't know this guy from Adam. But I didn't immediately say, well, there's a beloved child of God. My idea was, man, I don't know what this guy's going to do, okay? And there's a difference there. It's hard to know which is worse, our active hatred of the other, our negative lumping and labeling of others as lazy, vermin, or dirty, or our indifference to others, our utterly unchristian apathy that fails to hear the command that Christ has laid upon us and that refuses to assume any responsibility toward the other. It's not hatred that's the problem. Or one of my favorite sayings, I'm not apathetic, I just don't care. Okay, that's the thing. That's where we are. Okay? Another question. And if this ain't hard for you, you and me are different. How hard is it for you to pray for Donald Trump or Nancy Pelosi, depending on your political persuasion?
Depends what you're praying for, seeing the lights.
I understand. No. Yeah, but for their welfare.
Yeah, exactly. Whose transformation are we asking for here?
Yeah, yeah.
Right? I mean, that's really it.
Yeah, and there's a great deal of Fiddler on the Roof. Okay, you seen Fiddler on the Roof? Okay. Somebody asked the rabbi who's in the village. He says there is a prayer for everything. And they said, well, give us a prayer for the czar. And he says, may God bless the czar and keep him far away from me. You know, that's, you know. I occasionally visit the Episcopal Church with Mike and his bunch. And they have a prayers of the people that's always comes out of the Book of Common Prayer. And one of them almost always prays for the leaders of the nation and sometimes specifically for the president by name. And I remember thinking the first time we did that, knowing that there are a bunch of diehard Democrats in that bunch, that how hard they had reading that. Well, why? I mean, okay. Do I disagree with all that stuff? A lot of stuff he does? Absolutely. Okay. But are we not also making him or her, if you're an anti-Pelosi deal, we have to have our villains or villainesses. Am I making them the other? So that I can discount. So that I do not have to care, you know? And, you know, do the politics of this make me crazy? Yes. Do I scream at the television? Yes. Loudly. Much to the chagrin of my dogs who think I'm crazy. Not a bad analysis now that I think about it. But it isn't a question for us to consider. Another question. What does it mean for us to continually urge people, the other, to just get over it?
My sense is that means be apathetic about the same things I'm apathetic about.
Well, there's something else to it too. I think that if you don't get over it, I can't get over it.
Yeah, it's a plea for lay it down rather than it's not asking for forgiveness anymore.
No.
In any of this.
Not at all.
That's what's important.
No.
Yeah.
No, it's not.
Just come on over to my side.
Because if we have to ask forgiveness, then we have to admit we're complicit in something.
Yeah, well, sure. And that's why the whole reparations argument gets crazy real quick, because it's so emotionally loaded. Because I grew up in the Rio Grande Valley, and I have just recently been reading a lot of history of what went on late 1800s, 1900s, early 1900s down there. We had a 40-acre ranch, a farm down there, citrus orchard my dad bought when I was 3 years old. I am almost sure that was taken from some family that had it because of a Spanish land grant. And so then, how could I say to the Hispanics who I went to school with, well, why don't you lift yourself up by your own bootstraps? By God, we did. Yeah, we did. We climbed all over your backs to get there. Okay? Let's be clear. And until we do that, it's hard for us to discount our otherness stuff. Okay. Sadly, sometimes exclusion of the other is presented as a Christian virtue rather than a sin. No, really. We take upon ourselves God's prerogative to judge, separate, exclude, and embrace as if it were our own. We label another as a dangerous threat and construct our mechanisms of defense. The separation of the world into sinners and righteous is a notoriously tricky business, too bound up with our denial of our own sin, too caught up in structures of privilege, race, and class to be done without the greatest care and humility. I got here all by myself.
Do you
Want to
find that?
Huh?
Do you find that true in Methodist church?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's the line that's true is the 11 o'clock hour on Sunday morning is the most segregated hour in America.
The most what?
Segregated.
Oh yeah.
And of course, some of it's because they don't like our music because it's not as good as theirs. But anyway, that's another deal. Okay.
But I mean, it's yeah. I think but where Tim's going, this is a problem because I think this is a case where we can break our arm patting ourselves on our back.
Oh, absolutely.
Because of Methodism's, apparent openness and
Apparent,
all of this,
yes.
right? And
But mainly we're open to a particular class.
Yeah, other Methodists.
Okay, if a Methodist church is basically middle class white, they are more welcoming to basic middle class whites. I mean, and sometimes, remember what we said last week? I wish you'd been here. We were talking about the brain last week, and you would have known, and I didn't. Anyway, but okay, it takes more brain work to deal with somebody different than somebody alike. And so if you give us our choice, we will associate with people that are like us because we don't have to work as hard at it. We have all the same jokes. We have all the same. That's what's hard. Okay, I've got to push because I want to get to the video. Walter Wink. The issue is not what must I do to secure my salvation. Wait a minute. What must I do to secure my salvation? That pretty much disregards grace, but forget that. Okay, but rather, what does God require of me in response to the needs of others? It is not how can I be virtuous, but how can I participate in the struggle of the oppressed for a more just world? Okay, now, video time. You're going to see here that he says that we hold two passports. Watch for that. And consider his thoughts on Maundy Thursday. And Jesus' command to love one another. Do it, Kidu. Please play. It led you into a sense of security this morning because you set up easy. Please. Would you hit that light back there so we can...
I find an irony in that blood hymn, Amazing Grace. There's that phrase, it is grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace my fears relieved. I think that's that weird paradox is in the faith, the Christian faith, that, as the prophets say, it's a fearful thing to fall into the hands of a living God. There at Easter, the women are told by the angel of the tomb, fear not. Why would you be afraid of Easter? Well, it's a fearful thing to realize that we have a God who is active and intruding and loving and intervening. And yet, we also can testify that in the Christian faith, to know that God is love, that God is working out God's good purposes for the world, we can also know that it is grace my fears relieved.
So in this chapter, we're talking about learning to fear like Christians. and how to really see how we were made and were remade over and over by grace in order to embrace the other.
Years ago, there was a book called Learning How to Fight Like Christians in the Church. And it was kind of rules for Christian argument in the congregation without destroying the congregation, as I remember. Well, I think as well you could have a book, Learning to Fear Like Christians in the church. And then to think of church as sort of trained in being fearful of, what are we fearful of? I guess we should be fearful of disappointing God, of betraying ourselves and our values and goals. And at the same time in church, we get some help in a lot of the things that you are so worried about and they cause you anxiety and fear, and a lot of the people and groups that cause you fear, those are misplaced fears that from which you can be relieved. I think, for instance, we have conversations and people will say, we got to protect our borders. The national sovereignty is at stake. America's got to do this. Okay, I'm bothered when I, as a Christian, too easily sort of slip into our borders. You talk about the United States borders. I'm a citizen of the United States and all, but yet I carry 2 passports in my pocket, and one of the passports is as a Christian baptism. It may mean that we have some different views about borders. It may mean we have some different views about people and our responsibilities. And I think church is where you come to be reminded, hey, I'm a citizen, I'm a member of the nation and all, but that's not the end of the discussion or my moral responsibility or my concerns.
And as you say that, I think about, in regards to fear, we are so, and you say it in the book, we are so committed to fearing other more than fearing the God that is calling us to love one another. And so I would ask you, why does healthy fear of God seem to be passé? And what's the difference between awe and terror?
Ooh, that's deep. I think that we probably fear more breaking some state law than we do God. I mean, for instance, on Maundy Thursday, a typical text is from John's Gospel where Jesus says, "A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another as I have loved you. This is how people will know you're on board with me as my disciple, that you love one another." Well, we get our word Maundy Thursday from the Latin mandatum, it's a command. I just simply noticed it's not a new suggestion I give to you, a new hint, or let me suggest that your life will go a whole lot better if you love one another. Jesus just flat out says, I command you to love one another. Might be good to ask ourselves, how many times have I backed off from some encounter with someone of another race, another nationality, another faith? When I backed off and I said, oh, wait a minute. I don't want to disappoint Jesus on this. I want to be true to his faith in me. I want to obey him. So I'm going to do this. There is a healthy fear of the Lord. It is, and it's a fear maybe in love. An analogy for me is like your parents, your mother. I mean, I know people in their 50s who still will not smoke a cigarette in front of their mother. Even though some mothers are older, well, that's kind of what, and they do it not out of fear that she's going to terrorize them, but they do it out of love. And I think this sense about perfectly natural, typical for 9 out of 10 Americans is to fear the other. Okay, yeah. But Christians actually believe, no, we don't want to disappoint God. We don't want to disobey. That even people like us can be faithful.
And I think, as you say that, I also think that if we're going to forgive, and when there is that act of forgiveness, there is a process of healing. But in the book you talk about that no real healing can happen without honest conversations and without naming, here are the ways in which I have operated that have separated me from you, and vice versa. So will you talk a little bit about that? How we can't make restorations of wounds, or we can't really get into reconciliation if we're not willing to be honest about the ways that we have operated that are not God-like, that are not Christian-like.
Absolutely. Truthfulness, I think, is under some attack in our national discourse. But church is a community of truth. We actually claim that Jesus Christ makes possible a people who can tell the truth about ourselves, about one another. We have this little act of worship in my church that we begin on nearly every Sunday. We all gather, we sing a hymn, we come in, the minister says, okay, stand up now, repeat after me. I have done wrong. I have sinned. I have benefited from privileges I did not earn or deserve. And we call it confession of sin. And afterwards we give forgiveness. Well, I think it's kind of amazing in a society that is very defensive and evades truth-telling and degrades people who tell the truth and false news. In that kind of society, for the church together and say, all right, let's shut the doors now, let's all get started, and let's tell the truth. That is so important. And one of the great things in conversation with the other, I remember I was in conversation with an African American pastor, and we were talking about overcoming adversity. And I mentioned something about some adversity I'd overcome, and he said, "Oh yeah," he said, "Oh, I remembered. I had this. I wanted to, as a kid, I wanted to play baseball, and I was going to be a great baseball player, and so I joined this team, and we played a game, and I was in left field, and everything was going great and all, and then after the game, one of the mothers came to me. He said, I was about 12. One of the mothers came to me and she said, why don't you get on a team with your own kind? And he said, with people who are good at baseball? I'm pretty good. And she said, no, that's not what I mean. Look at that. Is there anybody out on this team the same color as you? And he said, I went home and my mother said, it's really inconvenient for you to be on that team. Now you have to be on that team. You've got to stay on that team. You will be on that team and you will crush everybody. You'll be so good. Well, I sat there with tears coming down my face. And I said to him, nothing like that's ever happened to me. Someone looking like me said that to you as a child? And he said, yeah, it was okay. I said, no, that's just horrible. And I said, yeah, how long have I known you? And he said, let's say a couple of years we worked together. I said, never in one instant have I ever felt you were using that against me or holding back or holding that against me. And I said, teach me how to be as good a person as you are. And he said, come on, stop that. You're my pastor. Well, so that to me, I was told the truth. And one of the things that made it both so beautiful and so painful, I don't think he was trying to tell me any painful truth about myself. But God gets in there and God says, hey, have you heard what you've just been told to you? And so Aristotle said that an immoral person is a person with no friends. Because only friends know how to hurt you in the right way for your betterment. Only friends have the right to tell you the truth. So maybe the way to get to the truth about my fear of the others is to get some friends. I've noticed in discussing the issue of fear of others and threat by others, unfortunately there's often somebody in the room to say, well, my best friend is Muslim, or my best friend is Muslim. And gives testimony to that. And so God has created us that way too. It's interesting, Jesus doesn't call individuals. If he calls individuals, he immediately puts them in a group, 12 disciples. The church is called the ecclesia, the called out. Called out in order to be called together. I'm kind of troubled that a lot of preaching I hear, and some of it that I do, presents the Christian faith as personal. Here's how you can personally help your individual life to be happier or less stress-free or whatever. I just don't think that's the gospel. The gospel is about join up, come be part of this new people that God is making that is different from the nations. And also, Jesus says, it's not only enough for you to join up, but keep reaching out, keep bringing in, keep being surprised at the people I bring to your door. Well, that's also part of who we are. And I know a church which baptized a Spanish-speaking family from Central America, and part of the service was in Spanish and part was in English. And the pastor asked the family, why did you come to our church? And they said, well, we've never heard of Methodists before. Where we live, there weren't any. We didn't come to you, you came to us. And you're the only people that welcomed us here. And you helped us get a car. You helped us get a good job. And when she finished, the woman being baptized finished her testimonial, the pastor, with tears in her eyes, said, wow, we're a better church than I thought we were. Okay, people in the church look out applause. It was applause for themselves in a way, which was good to say, wow, isn't that amazing? We have so many reasons why we shouldn't be embracing and welcoming. And yet, somehow God did that among us. Isn't it good to be here?
In spite of us.
In spite of us. And a lot of the work God does is in spite of us. I'm a Methodist, Wesleyan tradition, believe in sanctification, holiness. And people say, do you really believe God can make us holy? And I said, you're talking to, I'm from South Carolina. And I grew up in a segregationist culture, a white supremacist culture. I know I'm not perfect, but you won't believe what's happened to me since I met Jesus. I mean, he has been busy. You wouldn't have wanted to know me pre-Jesus, I promise. And I think that can be the claim of every Christian.
Feel like a Christian.
Yes.
Two passports. I just found that a very interesting way to look at that. Two passports. Now, why is it doing that? I got no clue. Oh well. We're timed out. See you next time around. Chapter 4. Okay?